5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
High and low, it's how I roll. A shooting star in a film noir. I'm floating around 10 feet on the ground. I'm floating around 10 feet on the ground.
Hey there, guys. It's John Baranchuk coming at you, Dr. John. Here we are at Big Grasping Sasquatch, Stories and Science, where I'm pushing my bias, if you will, that psychological science offers a pathway to proof without needing a cadaver or a body. Today, we're going to just go over some terms to try and begin to lay a scientific foundation so we can speak the same language when we start talking about experimental design and statistics, because that's the thing that we're not doing. And right out of the gates, if you're hearing me well, let me know, because I don't seem to have the sensitivity in my mic that I used to. But if you're hearing me well or poor, say good or okay or bad, whatever. Where was I? I'm just trying to lay a common foundation for a language so that we can all speak the same language is what it boils down to. And that's what I'm going to touch on, a few subjects to that degree today. The format of my show, as many of you know, is to, if you have a question, type it in all caps and send it through. And I'm a one-man band here, so I'm looking in my chat only for large case letters, because those tell me that they are questions and I want to attend to your questions. So large caps for questions, smaller case for conversation. Learning happens lots of different ways. Let's see, what else can I tell you? Oh, so the first part of my format here is to read something from a book. And since my bias is science, I wanted to read something out of Ron Moorhead's book, The Quantum Bigfoot. Because this is theoretical science on one level with some mathematical support, no doubt. But I just, this is kind of where a lot of people, interestingly enough, by my observation at least, a lot of the OG guys that have been doing this for a while, Ron Moorhead being one of the more notable ones, kind of get into the quantum entanglement and quantum theory and how that might be impacting our experience of Bigfoot. And part of the reason I want to read this is that it certainly forms a theoretical foundation for many of what would be called woo theories. Um, and so the message I keep preaching about that is my bias is that, we've got something here with theoretical support at least. And so we've got to try and examine it within the parameters of psychological science as best as we can. And, a lot of the definitions will focus on science and decision making today. So that's the loose association here. I've noticed a pattern in experimental reports with the Sasquatch. If with every cell we are seeking love, then we receive a feeling of deep love. If we are seeking fun and mischief, we get beings who play jokes with us. And if due to our interpretation of our life circumstances, we have not moved beyond feeling love as ego recognition, then that is what we receive. Findings and interactions that make us feel important and loved, not realizing that what we are getting is the exact reflection of our mental and emotional psyche. This may be really hard to swallow, but if they are indeed trying to teach us, and if some of our human idioms run true, and we can stand and look long enough, then a mirror indeed is our most powerful teacher. That's quoted on page 105. Carrie Campbell said that. Goes on to say that the Russians have studied this subject intensely. It cites another authorship. But, so going even further, Eric, then nice to see you, bud. We get what we seek. This can go off onto patterns of, how we create our realities and what realities we create for themselves, what realities we create for ourselves, and how that might influence our perception of the Bigfoot experience. So this is from a Vernet's Intelligence by von Grazia Forsar and Franz Bludorf. Wow. Here we go. The human DNA is a biological internet and superior in many aspects to the artificial one. Recent scientific research directly or indirectly explains phenomena such as clairvoyance, intuition, spontaneous and remote acts of healing, self-healing, affirmation techniques, unusual light auras around people, namely spiritual masters, mind's influence on weather patterns, and much more. In addition, there is evidence for a whole new type of medicine in which DNA can be influenced and reprogrammed by words and frequencies without cutting out or replacing single genes. It's the second time I've seen notice in doing some readings about our genetic material responds to tones. And I'm harking back to E.T. Fly Home, and I don't even know the one with Richard Dreyfuss. Close Encounters, thank you. They communicate it through tones in that movie. And it's kind of interesting to me that, they're finding that our DNA responds to tonal frequencies. and the implications for that in terms of healing and a lot of other things. Back to the reading here. Only 10% of our DNA is being used for building proteins. It is this subset of DNA that is of interest to Western researchers and is being examined and categorized. The other 90% are considered junk DNA. Russian researchers, however, convinced that nature is not dumb, joined linguists and geneticists in a venture to explore those 90% of junk DNA. The results, findings, and conclusions are simply revolutionary. According to them, our DNA is not only responsible for the construction of our body, but also serves as a data storage and in communication. Russian linguists found that genetic code, especially in the apparently useless 90%, follows the same rules as in our language. To this end, they compared the rules of syntax, the way words are put together to form phrases and sentences, semantics, the study of the meaning of language forms, and basic rules of grammar. They found that the alkalines of our DNA follow a regular grammar. Let me try this again. They found that the alkalines of our DNA follow a regular grammar and do have set rules just like our languages. So human languages did not appear coincidental, but are reflective of our inherent DNA. And again, harken back to and this is a big issue in self-change and helping people change, is we create our realities where we focus our thoughts. And what we put our thought energy into, we're more likely to manifest in our lives. And that's just an important note as far as I'm concerned. One can simply use words and sentences of the human language. This too was experimentally proving. Living DNA substance in living tissue, not in vitro, will always react to language modulated laser rays, even to radio waves if the proper frequencies are being used. Wow. So this is going on to speak to, again, tonal qualities that associated with our DNA, which I think is very, very interesting. Esoteric and spiritual teachers have known for ages that our body is programmable by language, words, and thought. This has now been successfully proven and explained. So our thoughts, what we put out in our consciousness, that can be manifested and is manifested in our reality. And I'm trying to manifest people understanding why psychology is so important in proving Bigfoot as a species. I'm going to call it and end it from there. Look for some other passages in the future. But we create our realities through our words, which oftentimes reflect our thinking verbally, our thoughts visually, or in terms of memory. And all those things factor into how we experience Bigfoot and what we experience as Bigfoot. So, barring any questions, current state of technology of graphics. My buddy Wayne Tothero, he's got all these incredible graphics for his shows and his ads. And I tried to figure out how to snatch some of those things up. I couldn't figure it out. So this is the best I could do. There is a little joke in there, but it's pretty little. Um, but basically, just going over some scientific language. If, again, my bias, what are we doing? And not everybody has to share this goal. I was reminded of this again today. Not everybody has to share my goal or anyone else's goal of trying to prove um, the existence of Bigfoot. I've met a lot of people who whose opinions I respect highly that they've given up on proof and just are going with the experience and through their own experiences know they exist, and I don't have any problem certainly with that. Um, but I'm still biased towards science simply because I can see so clearly, I think, how psychologic experimental design and statistical analysis could be applied to Bigfoot phenomena. And in doing so, um, if we got several phenomena hitting the target or a bullseye on Bigfoot, we're taking huge strides in proving the phenomena are associated with Bigfoot rather than human, for example. Dogman sounds like we got to rule out, and other forms of error that can go into an experiment. At any rate, off of that high horse. So, I want to start tonight with decision making. Again, I'm not going to, it's something, if you understand the English language, um, you know what a decision is, and you know what it means to make a decision. We make our decisions every day: when to get up, when to go back to bed, what to eat. These many are conscious, thought out decisions, but eventually, even thought out decisions can go through unconscious programming. And those decisions can then be used in determining how we react emotionally. And so the example of how we can learn emotions is what I'm going to talk about for a few seconds here. I hearken back to seeing a toddler just in its first few steps or days of steps, learning to walk. And if you've seen this, if you've got grandchildren, which I do not, but or a child even, just taking, just being around kids of this age, you'll notice this if you watch close enough at the right times. When a baby first starts standing up, like at the edge of the table, and putting its hands on the edge of the table, and it falls down on its butt, or maybe when the baby just baby, man, I don't know what to call them. Maybe when they take their first step, they fall down. If you watch closely and they're just starting to walk, what you're going to notice is the baby looking around the room, sitting there on its butt, looking around the room. What's going on here? And what that baby is looking at is the adults in the room and their reactions to the baby falling down on its butt. Now, if the reactions are one of, "Oh, you poor thing, that must have hurt. Oh, my goodness." And they make it this painful, kind of traumatic thing that the baby fell on its butt, which wouldn't cause it any pain anyways. No need to cry. How many times do you think that response has to happen before the baby learns to cry when it falls down on its hind end? On the other hand, if that same fall is treated like, oh my goodness, baby, go boom boom, you know, and a big smile on the parent's face, laughing pleasantly, making silly faces, or making light of the fact that the baby fell down on its butt, the infant can quickly learn and decide to laugh about the fall. And so, even at the age there where they're just learning to walk, they're already making decisions about what are appropriate and inappropriate emotional responses by gauging their environment and gauging other organisms in the room. And so they're learning about how to respond emotionally through that feedback loop from the adults in the room. And so learning is the point here, guys. They keep learning that, and it happens pretty fast. You know, over a period of days, if they learn every time they fall, they get pitied and petted on, and it's this big emotional thing. It's going to become a big emotional thing if they learn to laugh it off. It's not going to be that big of a deal. But they do get switched to what I call automatic pilot. They no longer think about their emotional responses and make a conscious decision any longer. Now, what started as a conscious decision, literally sitting around the room, sitting on its butt, looking around the room at the adults in the room, gauging the adults' emotional reaction. It's actually a pretty awesome form of learning for a child at that age when you think about it. Well, that's an example of how we learn. I'm of the age where I drove a clutch car. So I had to learn to push in the clutch, let off the brake, and give it gas as I let out the clutch. And for quite a few weeks of driving, that was like a very thought out, conscious process for me. Until over a period of months and years, I could drive without having to consciously think about where exactly the clutch and the gas and the brake pedal were. It got put over to unconscious processing, if you will. You could conceptualize it as that. Automatic processing. The decision, though, is not a conscious, under conscious control anymore, if that makes any sense. The good news about learning emotions and learning to react at that early of an age is we can unlearn those reactions and behaviors. Important to Bigfoot sightings, phenomena, and experience, however, are three broad classes of decision-making processes, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on this. Approach versus approach decisions. Eric, this should be a send back for you, buddy. Approach versus avoidance. Avoidance versus avoidance. Let me see, John. I don't want to ignore you. When my kids started walking, they remind me of a drunken sailor. He left until the try again. There you go. That's as a parent, I found a lot. There we go. So the first one we're going to talk about is an approach. My goodness. Where am I? I have lost my place. I'm sorry, guys. Here we go. Everybody with me on how thoughts as well as emotions shift from a conscious decision-making process to an unconscious automatic process, because that's important to understand. So the typical or the easiest decision to make when we have to make a decision, and again, we make thousands of decisions a day, a lot of them pre-conscious or subconscious, but it's happening. In an approach avoidance situation, you've got one choice that's very appealing, and you've got another choice that's not at all appealing. So, do we want a tenderloin steak or liver? Ice cream cone or tablespoon of cod liver oil? Mercedes-Benz or Kia, when you could afford either? Easy approach avoidance decisions. One's very appealing, the other is distasteful. But what about going on a Bigfoot expedition after just having a terrifying encounter with a Bigfoot? There's part of you that wants to go to be out in the outdoors. You love the people in the research group. You need to see Bigfoot once again to validate for yourself that that's really just what happened. These are all the approach aspects of going out on another expedition after you have a Class A encounter. On the other hand, it literally just scared the piss or shit out of you. You're having nightmares and intrusive memories of the event. You just want to put it behind you, forget it, and move on with life. You want to avoid it. Just put it behind you. Classic approach avoidance decision, in which case there are some positives associated with sometimes getting out there and going at it again. Where am I skipping over? I'm sorry. Approach avoidance. I'm missing one somewhere. Another one is, we'll go with avoidance versus avoidance. Avoidance versus avoidance is also the toughest. The approach avoidance is the easiest kind of decision to make because there's one clear choice. The avoidance versus avoidance decision is probably the toughest decision to make for yourself. Because in avoidance decisions, the choices are something you find distasteful, repulsive, painful, or unpleasant against another thing you find distasteful, repulsive, and painful, or otherwise unpleasant and anxiety producing. So, you want to have an intravenous IV injection, or you want to go have your blood drawn? To the dentist or waterboarding? Shovel elephant crap or rhino crap all day? Eat Limburger cheese or durian fruit? Hickory switch or dad's belt? I don't know about the rest of you guys. I was raised on dad's belt. In each case, you find either option unpleasant and you don't want to choose either one. This is kind of the runaway, danger, danger, Will Robinson, run away, run away. I left one out of there apparently when I made my final cut. The other one is not avoidance, but approach. When you've got two pleasant tasks and you got to choose between, you can only have one. You know, I don't know, the hot fudge sundae or the banana split. Um, Other approach kind of decisions, having to choose between positive things and options, and that can also be challenging to do. So I'm going over this mainly to highlight for you guys that, you know, these three categories of decision making are happening to you when you're experiencing a Bigfoot phenomena on an expedition. Um, we focused on conscious intent in making those decisions. But as I said earlier, some decisions are unconsciously made or otherwise made. The bluff charge, for example, if you've ever been one, it wasn't too much thinking involved for me. It was a reaction. Um, when you've been longing for a Class A sighting but have a fleeting partial sighting of something that could have been a Bigfoot, what is your decision in reporting it? Do you unconsciously or subconsciously report it as a Class A approach, thereby getting swept up in the expedition group process of excitement, congratulations, praise from peers? Or do you admit and maintain uncertainty in the face of that group process? Chalk it up to just one more of many Class B or C sightings that you experience. Not too tough, guys, to experience a Class C sighting. BFRO pretty much defines that as that's Haas saying hello. Pretty much defines that as Haas, come here, bud. Just somebody telling you a story about a sighting they've had. Them telling you that story, you've experienced a Class C sighting. So it's second-hand or third-hand information. Do you go along with the group in terms of your decision making? You're in a group of 3 to 5 people. You know, 2 or 3 people experience an event and you don't, and somebody next to you doesn't. Do you stand your ground and say that it didn't happen for you? So, do you want to be the odd man out? Not to mention, on an expedition, there's a group process going on where people are getting to know each other, and there's a hierarchy within that community of the expedition group. And so, as that group process in and of itself and the force of the person's knowledge base and personality can have a big influence upon what decisions we make. Kind of an inside joke. Glenn Williams is a Bigfoot friend, and he prepares this pantry camp stew. Sorry about the dog, guys. This is a second time he's done this. We got neighborhood dogs roaming around, and they're getting him all wound up. And do you eat it then, knowing your stomach's going to be growling? Avoidance. Or do you eat something else like canned beans, noticing that your stomach will still be grumbling, and you'll be farting at the evening's expedition? Avoidance, an example of an avoidance decision that you face on an expedition. See this in caps? John Ayers. He's trying to tell you Sasquatch is at the door. Yes. So let's time to buckle up, because we're going to start heading down a path that gets kind of serious. Serious? No, but intense. Important to understand in terms of decision making and science. Eric, you've been calling for it, buddy. So, one, note that each decision you make could be conceptualized as an experiment in and of itself. A test, if you will, in and of itself. In Sasquatch science, the tests that we're going to be using are going to be things like the phenomena that we're already using. The tree knock test, whether it's a tree knock or not. The stone clacking test. The tree structure test. Okay? But anytime you're given a test, one of the things that's important to understand is the results. So my book was written when we were in the throes of COVID, but it still kind of applies today. The question is, do I have COVID-19? Even if you have a passing interest in Bigfoot, the most pressing Bigfoot question seems to be, does Bigfoot exist? But these questions have to be transformed into hypotheses. A hypothesis, guys, is an educated guess based on observation and knowledge in the field. That's what a hypothesis is. It's not a theory which is steps on down the line. So these questions must be transformed into hypothesis for experimentation and testing purposes. This is done simply by restating them in their affirmative. The alternative hypothesis that you would form would be, I do have COVID, and Bigfoot does exist. Versus their negative, or what's also known as the null hypothesis, and this is very important to understand. The null hypothesis, I do not have COVID, or Bigfoot does not exist. We'll run over the COVID hypothesis first, and then the Bigfoot hypothesis after that. Let me know, John, if this is any better. I just caught your message. Something is not right with my microphone. Next show I'll try a different one. So, COVID. Anytime you're trying to... jumping ahead. Anytime you're trying to answer a question, or anytime you're trying to test a hypothesis, that's what you're doing when you go to have your COVID test. You're testing the hypothesis that you have COVID. There's always 4 possible outcomes. And guys, I want to spend some time on this because this is really important stuff. I'm going to look at this little 4-window box. I'm going to ask you to note that on the top of the box, or towards the heading of the top heading of the slide, we've got reality. To the far left of the box, we've got what the test results tell us. Okay? One side of the box is the reality of the situation. Do you or don't you have COVID? And then on the left, the test results is, what do the test results tell us? Do you have COVID according to the test, or don't you have COVID according to the test? So we'll start here with the top right box. In reality, you have COVID, and the test results tell us you have COVID. That's great. That's what we want. That's called a hit. It's a true positive. The test was powerful in sorting out whether you have COVID in reality or not. Now, what in fact if you don't have COVID in reality and the test says you do have it? That's called a false positive, upper right hand corner of the square. So it's a miss. We want to hit, not miss, our target. And it's what's called a type 1 error. And that's important to remember because type 1 error is how we determine statistical significance, which we'll get into another time. Not too long from now. But so type 1 error, miss. The test saying you have it, but in fact you don't have it. Type 1 error. Down to the bottom left-hand box, in reality, you have COVID, but the test results say you don't have it. That's a false negative. That's a miss, but that's called a type 2 error. A type 2 error being test results misleading you and giving you false information. In reality, you had COVID, but the test said you didn't have it. And then finally, lower right-hand corner. In reality, you don't have it, and the test says you don't have it. That's a true hit. Okay? So what does all this mean, or why is this even relevant? Well, it's not just a yes or no question or a yes or no answer when you run a test. Because not only can you get true results, true positives and true negatives, but you can also get false positives and false negatives. And depending on what you're measuring, you want to err either towards a type 1 type error or a type 2 type error. For example, if you're treating people with the big C, you don't want them to have the big C in reality and have the test come back that they don't have it. Because the error in that is massive, because then the big C goes untreated for a period of time, as opposed to the results coming back that you have the big C, but in reality you don't have it. It's still going to be pretty traumatizing. But so in medical situations, we want to guard against making a type to error, because that's the less detrimental, if you will. So this is an example of where psychological design and experimentation and statistical analysis increases the certainty of our test results and the validity of our test results, if that makes any sense to you. And this is something that experiential evidence and experiential analysis just can't give us. It can't give us control over a type 1 or a type 2 error. We could be making it and not even knowing it. And when we get in statistics, you can actually use some setups and some tests that give you the probabilities of a true positive and a true negative, a type 1 or a type 2 error. But this will come back to again and again and again, because it's another thing you need to be aware of when you're making a decision about whether you just saw a Bigfoot or not. In that instance, you are the test, and you are the reality. And that's why it's important for you to be aware of your own biases, what you're hoping to see. How could that be influencing your perception of what you saw? And you have 4 outcomes when you make that identification. Or when you say, yeah, that's a picture of Bigfoot. Or no, that's not a picture of Bigfoot. Or that's Dogman. Those are all decisions that have 4 possible outcomes. Every decision you make has 4 possible outcomes. And you can, if you really want to get anal and track it, you could probably track your decisions on the day and calculate your true positives and true negatives and hits and misses and all that kind of interesting stuff. So, God, there should be some questions about this, guys. I can't tell you how it's important. I feel like I'm understating, or I'm. Let's read on, and maybe I'll fill in the gap for you here. This is explaining what I just explained. I'm not going to do it again. So a false positive, the test result was incorrect. It was a miss. We talked about type 1 and type 2 error. And it's, again, important to understand, why we're erring on the side of type 2 error. Why we're falling on the side of type 2 error rather than type 3 or type 1 error. Okay. When you run this through a computer, or if like me, you had to learn how to do it with a calculator and a book with tables in it. When you run this through, you're going to get, I earlier alluded to that it'll tell you the chances of a type 1 error in your experiment. And again, today I was interacting with a nice person who somehow we were talking about statistical significance. So let's say that you run an experiment to differentiate between human tree knocks versus Bigfoot tree knocks. And you find, in fact, that the Bigfoot area has significantly more responses than the human error area when you ran your test of tree knocks in those two separate areas. And as a result, you can run a test to see if that difference is a significant one, a statistically significant one, or if it's just due to random error. And that test is called a p-test. It's a probability. Not, well, it does boil down to a formula, but it's a probability statement that, the results were significant at a 0.05 level or a 0.0001 level. That's very impressive. Well, what that 0.01, 0.05, 0.001 statistic, you'll always see it after a small letter P, a greater than sign, and then you'll see a number 0.0 something, hopefully. That's telling you the significance of your finding, but it's telling you the significance of your finding not being produced by a type 1 error. And I don't know about you, but I need another reminder of what a type 1 error is. When you don't have it in reality, and you don't have it, the test result, in reality, you don't have it, and the test results saying you do have it. So your test results coming out saying that this is due to Bigfoot. The higher number of tree knock responses in the Bigfoot area is significantly greater than in the human area. But in reality, you don't have that significance. Okay? So that's an error. And it's telling us what are the chances that your results are due to that type 1 type of error. Why is that important? Because your results are statistically driven, and as such, it's in the numbers. That tells you how valid your test was and what your results are. And so the level of significance is usually decided and set ahead of time, a priori, based on the probability of this error, making a type 1 error. You will see a variety of numbers used to reflect the level of significance. 0.001, 0.01, 0.05, 0.15. 0.15 is rarely found significant. It's kind of a borderline score in terms of significance. In at least psychology, if you want something to be significant, you want it to be significant at the 0.05 level, meaning there's only 5 in 100 chances that this result came as a result of error, type 1 error. Or 0.01, 1 in 100 chances that we got this result as we got these findings as a result of an error. Okay? So obviously the higher the numbers of zeros in front of the dot are, the lower the probability of this result being due to error. You can't say that about an opinion that the number of tree knocks a Bigfoot makes corresponds to the number of people in the Bigfoot subparty. That's just a presumption. That's an idea. If you want to test it, you got to make it a hypothesis, not just put it out there as a theory. Numbers greater than 0.05, 0.15, for example, are considered too high of a frequency of risk of a type 1 error. So at 0.15, now there's 15 out of 100 chances that your results are due to error. Oh, excuse me, butt's hurting. Rather than being valid. Here's something that I have seen in so many Bigfoot books. So you read in the note, or may even have a footnote, or it'll be interpreted in the test results section. They'll state a statistical finding is significant at a 0.01 level, p less than, I said greater than before, I'm sorry, p less than 0.01. So there's less than a 1 in 100 chance that it's due to random error. What this means is there are less than I just said that, due to a type 1 error. The level of statistical significance, that little p value, all that speaks to is that the experimental results are not due to error or due to error. You can't say, well, it's a 0.01 statistical significance. That means there's a 0.99 chance that it's due to Bigfoot. That p-value does not speak to the likelihood that Bigfoot is producing your test results. It only speaks to the likelihood that your test results are due or not due to type 1 error. And that's a very important principle to understand, because people frequently, in well thought of authors, frequently misinterpret this statistic to mean, well, if there's only a 1 in 100 chance that it's not due to error or Bigfoot, or to error, that must mean there's a 99% chance it's due to Bigfoot. That's not what it does. That's not what that statistic speaks to. There are statistics that speak to that. An example being an effect size. How much of your data and influence of your data is due to an effect of Bigfoot rather than the effect of humans. So far, any questions, guys? Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. I appreciate that. A lot more to understand, but before you can appreciate why that's so important, I'm sorry to say, guys. But the things that I just went over, especially the decision making, and realizing that every decision you make on an expedition, every decision you make in life, there are 4 possible outcomes. True hits, true true positives, true negatives, false positives, false negatives. I also want to briefly just speak to statistical significance a little bit more, and remind my more frequent flyers of the ice cream story. Is there a co-relationship? Is there a correlation between temperatures rising and ice cream melting, or is there a causal relationship? Does rising temperatures cause ice cream to melt? This question was proposed to me, believe it or not, in my anatomy and physiology class. I don't know how this came up. Or is it just coincidence that as temperatures rise, ice cream melts? So the right answer here is there's not a causal relationship between temperatures rising and ice cream melting, because when that ice cream is below freezing, raising that temperature up to just below the melting level, it doesn't make a difference. It's not melting. Once you get above freezing level, then it begins to melt. So for that first rise from whatever temperature it's frozen at to the melting point, there's not that one-to-one relationship where, every degree it goes up, ice cream melts more. It's not that way. So that's a co-relationship. There's rising temperatures do have something to do with ice cream melting, but only when it reaches above a certain temperature. So there's a statistical relationship between temperatures rising and ice cream melting. But the reality, the clinical reality, if you will, is as long as your ice cream stays below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, it's not going to melt. Statistical significance versus clinical significance, depression. I always sell psychology. We've managed to identify, quantify, and treat depression pretty effectively, I think, as a psychological and counseling community. But and one of the ways we measure that is through different tests that measure different aspects of depression and different levels of those aspects of depression. And you can give that person that depression test when they first start treatment and are very depressed, and midway through treatment or towards the end of treatment, and then look at those test results across time. And hopefully what you would see would be a lowering of the depression scales, elevations on happiness, hope, other kinds of scales. And if those scales raised, depending on your test, 10 to 15 points, that would be considered a statistical significance. But what does that say about how the person looks? The person's still coming into your office crying, upset, dysphoric. So the test may show that she's less depressed than when she came into your clinic. But clinically, when you look at her, clinically is what you observe, okay? Clinically, when you observe her, she's still got the same symptoms of depression, and they're still visible. So part of the point here is, again, there's a difference. Depending on what you're studying, what Bigfoot phenomena you're studying, you need to think about, so what does it mean if there's this, if Bigfoot's, you're doing a tree knock study and the designated Bigfoot area responded with significantly more tree knocks than the human area did. What is the clinical significance of that, even after it's been proven statistically? And that's a rhetorical question. I don't know that I have the answer to that. Tree knocks versus stone clacks. It's another experiment that needs to be done. What more likely produces a Bigfoot response? A tree knock or stone clacks? You can go out tomorrow in the woods and start doing this research if you wanted to. Compare the number, do 20 tree knocks, record how many responses you get. Do 20 stone clacks. Better yet, not even 20. Do three tree knocks, see if you get any response. 3 stone clacks, see if you get any response. Move on to another area. Now do 3 stone clacks, see if you get any. And I'm not talking clack, clack, clack. I'm talking, a single clack and then waiting for a response. And then another single clack. Or you could alter them. Stone clack, tree knock. Stone clack, tree knock. And then in the next place you start with the tree knock and then go to the stone clack. Tree knock, stone clack, tree knock, stone clack. That switching the order helps you guard against a number of errors in assumption. If you make the tree knock first and nothing, and then a stone clack and something immediately comes back, how do you know if it immediately came back because of the stone clack, or was that a delayed response for the tree knocks? That's why alternating the tree knocks and the stone clacks, and then at the next place alternating them stone clack, tree knock, it balances out that error in your design, if that makes any sense. Main point, there is a difference between statistical significance, what your computer analysis, statistical analysis says, and what the reality, the clinical observable reality of that can be. Any questions? 707. As promised, we're getting to dissonance. And this is something I've touched on a little bit in previous shows, as I'm just kind of blabbing at you, seeing if anybody has any questions about decision making, the 3 types of decisions we face: approach, avoidance, and approach, avoidance. And how when we make a decision, every decision we make has 4 possible outcomes, including false positives and false negatives, and true positives and true negatives. But dissonance is a subject I've touched on. Hope to touch on it a little deeper tonight, because it drives so much in Bigfoot. I think in my introduction, my tease for my show today, I said something, I imagined myself sitting at night waiting for a Bigfoot kind of something, Lord, give me something that tells me Bigfoot's out there. I mean, there have been times I've prayed. Talk about biased. Talk about filtering an experience through shaded lenses. But you're sitting there waiting, and then you hear something that could be Bigfoot, but you're not sure. And so, what did you hear that? And the old timers, the folks who have been on a lot of BFR expeditions from the start, they discourage you from reacting in that way. And I think that's very interesting. I think it's very important, because if you think about it, if you go out in a group with multiple people, even if it's just 2 people, you hear that possible Bigfoot sign, or you see a fleeting glimpse of something, and that in and of itself creates this imbalance in your certainty of reality. And on one level, that's one way to think about what cognitive dissonance is. It's this your inner world, imbalance between your inner world and your outer world that you've got to resolve somehow to make sense of this. So, an unpleasantly psychological state resulting from inconsistency between two or more elements of a cognitive system. It is presumed to involve a state of heightened arousal, and you have characteristics similar to physiologic drives, hunger. Thus, cognitive dissonance creates a motivational drive in the individual to reduce this dissonance. You know, at the risk of going a little philosophical about psychotherapy and promoting behavioral and emotional change, you know, our systems get used to a balance. We like that equilibrium we have in our lives. Oftentimes, even when that equilibrium involves a lot of misery, because the devil we know is better than the one we don't know. I guess that would be an avoidance decision. But when we experience something that causes this dissonance, it's like a drive. It's like we are driven to try and understand that. And so it's hard for people to break themselves of reacting that way when you're on an expedition and somebody is asking that of you, because it's almost a natural reaction because of dissonance. What was that? Damn, did you hear that? The tree fall that Craig Roach and I heard earlier this year. We sitting by, well, damn, did you hear that? We both sat there and asked each other that same question. Obviously, we did. And again, I go into my deal about the difference between sensation and perception. We hear and experience these things through our perception. Our perception is tainted by our life experience, and as such, prone to bias. When you're prone to bias, your answers are also prone to bias. So, not that more examples need to be given. Did you hear that? If yeah, no, I won't say that. If you've been out on a Bigfoot expedition, you should know that happening. And I will say this, as somebody who really hadn't given it much thought until I had to pay $200 for an expedition. I've had expeditions. It's pretty rare to go on an expedition and not have somebody in your expedition have a hard class B sighting or possibly an A sighting. But I've experienced a lot of class B stuff that is very difficult to explain any other way. I just want to be able to state that with more authority by using science to quantify and identify that. Did you hear that, see that, smell that? Why are the animals quiet in the woods? That was a big one for me. Everybody talked about when they're around, the rest of the forest goes dead. The apex predator is in the area, and we're the only ones dumb enough to be traipsing around the forest, letting him look at us and draw attention to ourselves. Or she. Okay, again, regular followers will recognize this one. It's one of the few bits of original thinking in my book, however. And I think it's also an incredible, not incredible, but I think it's an important thing to think about and be leery of in ourselves. Especially, I read from Ron Moorhead's Quantum Bigfoot book, especially if we're going to stay open to woo phenomena that at least have a theoretical grounding in quantum physics. We've got to deal with incredulity bias. It's a belief or an opinion by someone's sense of righteous incredulity. It's refusing to believe a concept or idea because it's inconceivable, based on your own emotional reaction, to it being beyond your concept of consensus reality. What the? That's so damn far-fetched. It's out of the realm of any realistic possibility that it can't possibly be true. I can't and don't and won't believe it. I witnessed this, and when I formed this concept of incredulity bias, I was at a Bigfoot conference, and a pretty famous Bigfoot researcher who's on the circuit and has written quite a few books. Somebody walked up to the mic and asked him or anyone else on the panel if what their thoughts on mind speak were. And this renowned researcher perked up in his chair, put his hand to his ear, and sat there and made a frown, thinking intensely for about 10 seconds of silence. And then he said, "Did you get my answer?" And it got an appropriate laugh. Maybe inappropriate, I don't know. But to me, that inspired me to, this guy, the possibility of telepathy occurring in a Bigfoot is so out of the realm of possibility for this fellow that he can't even take it seriously. He makes a joke out of it. He's incredulous that somebody would even seriously consider that. Well, I don't know. I know some humans that are empaths and have telepathic abilities. So given that we don't know squat about what Bigfoot really is, I'm not of the belief that telepathic Bigfoots are so far-fetched. I won't argue that they do exist, but I will argue that we've got to keep our minds open to the possibility that they might exist. What kind of scientist would we be? Is the final part of this point. If back in the dark ages, when everybody was going to a barber's for bloodletting, we just continued down that path. But somebody developed a microscope, and the microscope helped us realize there are germs. And you can't see these germs with the naked eye, but they can make you sick. And no, there ain't no such thing as germs. If you can't see it, touch it, hear it, feel it, it can't possibly exist. Remember, when you're dealing with a skeptic, a lack of proof or something does not mean that that something doesn't exist. Okay? And so, as scientists, as researchers, we need to keep our minds open, because if we would have stayed with the incredulity of the barber claiming, leeches, bloodletting is what you need for everything, we would have never discovered germs and illness and been able to treat those. But somebody had to take that leap and go out there on a limb and say, yeah, germs, something we can see, we can't see in the air. It's invisible. Look under this microscope, I can show. It can make us sick. I'm afraid, that's the vibe I get from a lot of people, incredulity reactions towards woo phenomena. Well, we can't see it, we can't measure it, it can't possibly be happening. Again, just because you can't measure it, see it, touch it, feel it, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Um, another oldie but goodie, guys. Another one of my bits of original thought. I believe, and neuroanatomy and physiology accepts and provides evidence to this effect, that we are bias machines. And I've touched on this a little bit earlier. We are bias machines because the way our nervous system is made up is we've got one set of nerves running from our hands and legs up to our brain, and that's the nerves where sensation go up. Burning your finger travels up the sensory nerve and registers on your brain. The millisecond, and I mean the millisecond, it registers on your brain, it's no longer sensation. It's now called perception because your brain has processed it, and that's what perception is. Perception is when our brain processes a raw sensory stimulation. What does that have to do with bias? Well, it's bias because our perception is informed, controlled, regulated, back to the baby story, by our environment, reactions in our environment. Even, twins, they have different experiences being raised up in the same household. And so perception and how we experience our reality can form that reality and then bias that reality. I don't know why, because I'm not up on this stuff, but harkening back to quantum physics and Newtonian physics, the table that I'm tapping on, it's got more space in it than solid matter. But the matter is running around that nuclear core so quickly that it forms this perception of a table that's solid and we can't move through, even though there's more space than matter in this desk. So that's how our perception informs our reality. And because of that, we are biased in our decisions, we are biased in our perceptions. And that's an important thing to think about when you're doing Bigfoot research. What does the typical Bigfoot look like to you? What's that image? What's your stereotype of the Bigfoot? Nothing wrong with having one. There's something wrong with having one and not knowing it and allowing that to impact your perception of what you just saw, though. So it's hardwired. This is what's important to understand. It's hardwired into our body. You got the parasympathetic division of your nervous system, the sympathetic division of your nervous system. These are the two subdivisions of what's known as the autonomic nervous system. I always call it the automatic nervous system because everything going on in your body that you don't have to consciously think about to make happen, everything going on in your body that's on automatic pilot is controlled by the autonomic nervous system, or mediated would be a better word, I'm sorry. Mediated by the autonomic nervous system. It's where fight-flight comes from. Our fight-flight response is hardwired into our bodies. And that's why it's so important to also understand that you can reprogram that fight-flight. But that was episodes 1 through 7 and 9, 10, and 11. So let's think about fight-flight for a minute. Bigfoot jumps out from behind a bush 5 feet from you. What starts happening? Your pupils dilate. You've got that threat right in front of you, starting at the top right. If this goes on long enough, you'll get a dry mouth. Your bronchi are dilated, so your breathing becomes more rapid and shallow. Your heart rate accelerates. Your adrenal gland kicks in and epinephrine and norepinephrine release to stimulate sugars and getting this rush that goes along with the adrenal secretions. It inhibits stomach, pancreas, and intestines. People who stay under a lot of stress constantly, this has nothing to do with Bigfoot, but if you stay under stress a lot, GI problems go along with that. It inhibits urination. You start holding on to your urine. We'll skip the ejaculation. But once you realize it's a guy in a Bigfoot outfit, think about what's one of the first things that you do. I can't believe you were pulling that joke on me. I won't go back to a second expedition where there are pranksters. There's no need for that out on an expedition. So the sympathetic division of the nervous system is the triggering switch, the on switch, the excitatory switch that figures in fight, flight. What else does it figure in? Look at that list. Heart beating fast, digestion, shallow breathing, surges of energy, nervousness. That's anxiety, guys, which is why learning to relax is a good treatment for anxiety, because you're learning to control your sympathetic and parasympathetic division of your nervous system, which is otherwise out of your control unless you learn to relax. So once you realize it's a big old joke, the parasympathetic division kicks in. Your pupils constrict back down. Get more moisture in your mouth. You begin to breathe more deeply and regularly. Your heart rate slows down. Some people let go of their bladder and bowels after the threat has passed. Okay? But these same things that are hardwiring our fight-flight into our nervous system, that hardwire a physical reaction to an emotion like anxiety, these are the same things that are hardwired in and make us biased machines. It's hardwired right into our nervous system. We can't avoid it. You can be biased and not know it. Okay, questions about that? Don't be shy. Step up to the microphone. Because if there aren't any questions, my regular viewers may be getting bored again. But we're going to move on to probably one of the most important concepts or terms in science, in psychological science, and that is the psychological scientific method. It's at the core of what I'm promoting because it completes the cycle of designing an experiment, recording the data numerically, analyzing the data for statistical results, not opinion results, peer review, replication. The whole scientific method is what we're missing in our Bigfoot research right now if you want to be doing Bigfoot. Specifically, the next hurdles are learning more about experimental design and learning more about statistics. But what do we got, Craig? Yeah, I think I got it, but just to be safe, can you start over at the beginning? Is that to me, Craig? Hey, Jessica, how are you, girl? Nice to see you. Um, so, the psychological scientific method is a general set of procedures for gathering. Oh, hold on, I'll stop. What are your thoughts on how emotion may play a role in cognitive dissonance? Well, awesome question, David. Let me keep that up there. That's an awesome question. So, I think we've talked about my belief that, well, I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist, which basically means that I believe how we think and behave influences how we feel. So, cognitive dissonance itself is, for me at least, is both an emotion, has both an emotional component to it, David, as well as the cognitive component to it. You know, I first learned about cognitive dissonance. It was called the foot in the door technique, which salesmen use to sell you something you really don't need, door-to-door salesmen. You know, they somehow manage to get their foot in the door and get into your house, and suddenly you as a potential buyer is sitting there thinking, why is this guy in my house? I must have let him in there for a reason. And that creates that dissonance. I don't need this, but here I let this guy in. He's trying to sell me something. And so, you know, that cognitive imbalance, that uncertainty, what was that? Did you hear that, smell that, taste that? But then, I mean, even when I model that behavior, you can hear the emotion that goes with that, the surprise, the shock, the curiosity. So I'm not sure that we can separate the two when it comes to cognitive dissonance. Awesome question. Jessica says, I have a great study that covers this. Wagging the dog is another technique. Wagging the dog, for those of you who may not be familiar with that, we learned this in psychology, but I don't think it was called wagging the dog. Maybe it was cognitive dissonance. I don't know. But I learned more about it in hypnosis, interestingly enough, because you want to create in hypnosis, hypnotic relationships are a cooperative relationship between the hypnotic subject and the hypnotherapist. And to create that cooperation and that positive response set, you start when you're working with a person to ask them questions that require a yes response. So, you came in here for some hypnosis, yes, sir? And you're sitting in that chair, maybe wondering what this is all about, yes, sir? Well, let me tell you this as your feet are on the floor and you're sitting in that chair and wondering that you will be in control of your hypnotic experience. Hypnosis is not about losing control. So I made two positive statements, and you can stack them 3, 4, 5, 6. You can start with 1, build to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Or reverse, start high and go low. But the number of yeses you create in that conversation and in that mindset in interacting with that person, it in and of itself is a suggestion of cooperation and compliance. But it's also used by customer service relationships, used car salesmen, all that kind of stuff. They're trying to get you into a yes set so that when they ask you and you want to give it a test drive, you've already said yes 15, 20 times to his earlier comments. Thank you, Jessica. A general set of procedures for gathering and interpreting evidence that limits sources of error, yields dependable conclusions, and demands special attitudes and values of the scientist. General set of procedures. So, if you go to an psychological experimental design textbook, you're going to learn the same thing that I'll be teaching you in the future here, because there's all the subspecialties of psychology. We share the same methodology and procedure for gathering and interpreting evidence. So again, we got to follow strict codes and strict processes and procedures to interpret evidence. It's not enough to say, yeah, I think that was a Bigfoot. These special attitudes and values include but are not limited to motives driven by a curiosity about the unknown and the uncertain. I bet you everybody listening has a curiosity about the unknown or uncertain, or you probably wouldn't be here. In which we seek to discover lawful, orderly patterns of relationships in the target phenomena. We're seeking, and arguably this is a bias against science, we're seeking to discover lawful, orderly patterns of relationships of the target phenomena. So we're putting laws, trying to develop laws, understand things not like legal laws but scientific laws, to understand relationships in the target phenomena. But we're not starting with the laws in Bigfoot. We're starting with the target phenomena, the Bigfoot itself, its spore, if you will. And so we're immediately restricting or constricting the reality of those relationships, a la how a lot of people feel about woo. Okay. Target phenomena. In our case, the target phenomena um, is Bigfoot and their spoor, their tracks, their vocalizations, whatever. But so while we're discovering lawful, orderly patterns of relationships, we're also remaining critical and skeptical of all conclusions while simultaneously maintaining a necessary open mindedness that makes truth provisional, ready to be modified by new data, and never absolute. So here's something important to consider. You've got to be open minded, maintaining a necessary open mindedness that makes truth provisional. There are no absolute truths, which is why you will hear me always talk about my own biases. They're my truths, they're not everybody else's. So you got to remain open minded but skeptical at the same time. Remain critical at the same time that you're remaining open mindedness. Well, how do you do that? Well, when you look in the scientific literature, you'll see that they do that by certain degrees of tentativeness in their wording and in their speech. May be consistent with, or is not inconsistent with. They're never going to say it causes it. We develop specific language to dance around that. Okay, but how in the world do you be skeptical and critical and at the same time be open-minded? Boy, you got to be pretty open-minded to figure that out, I think. And truth is provisional. I've got to chuckle because when I read that just then, I thought about the big debates on different photographs and whether different photographs are truly Bigfoot or not. Uh, there's no provisional truth in those debates. It doesn't seem to me at all. Um, and again, that's why we need science. That's why we need to bring it, because we've got a pile of opinions that people are calling theories, and they haven't been even tested as hypotheses. Back for disagreements. What the results, the numbers, what do they tell us? People keep saying, science will never prove it. There are some out there, because I found some when I wrote my book, but I dare most of you to tell me, bring me a study on Bigfoot that has data and statistical analysis in it. I dare you. They're out there, but I dare you to do so because they're so rare out there. And so when I hear people complain that science just isn't up to the task of discovering Bigfoot, they'll never be able to capture woo phenomena, so why bother? A lot of people giving up. And on one hand, when you've had your class A, for a lot of people that's going to be good enough, and there's nothing wrong with that. You've got your proof. But on the other hand, if we're going to prove it to others, we need to bring science into it. But again, to the point here, it's the data that's the ultimate arbitrator. Secrecy is banned so that all data may be publicly verified, open to inspections, criticisms, and replication by others. Scientific knowledge is built on the base of empirical evidence obtained by observation and measurement, rather than solely on the basis of authority and beliefs and dataless experts. Dataless experts. They weren't even thinking about the Bigfoot community when they used that word, dataless experts. But we've got a lot of dataless experts out there. We've relied so long on using experiential phenomena to be our data points, but never went as far as numerically encoding them and analyzing them. We stopped 3/5, 2/5 through the scientific method. We just stopped using it. We just got to complete the other steps here, guys. We've already got the phenomena. We're good at finding the phenomena. We just got to start doing something with it rather than saying, oh, here's a footprint. Let me take a picture. Here's the cast. Let me take, ooh. So what's next? What are you going to do with that picture next to help prove the existence? Well, I don't know. It's good enough to prove it to me. Okay. And, I don't have my trophy pictures of my foot casts or my evidence to show on my show here or anywhere. I don't have that because I don't look for that necessarily. That's not important to me. What's important to me is what do we do with that? How do we make science out of that data? That's raw data, guys. All we got to do is figure out how to form an experiment around it, the phenomena, and we can start producing scientific data with a little bit of statistical analysis. Data is collected using methods to eliminate or correct for subjective influences of researchers, thereby increasing their objectivity. Inferences and conclusions about the meaning of the evidence are kept distinct from the description of the data and the methods for collecting them. When you write up your Nobel Peace Prize paper on finding Bigfoot, part of your paper will be a methodology, a literature review, a definition of the problem, methods, test, experimental design measures, results, like data results. And that's different from interpretation of data results. Two different sections. One shows you what the numbers the numbers themselves say, the raw numbers, and then in a separate section you'll write about what those numbers say to you and allow your reflection of how you interpret the data to be reviewed, analyzed, and criticized. That's part of what we're doing. That's part of science. Basic to such research is a reliance on empirical methods of investigating the mysteries of nature, systemic attempts to measure and quantify aspects of behavior and the process of the mind, adoption of procedural safeguards to increase objectivity and reduce the ever-present danger of personal biases. This is built into the scientific method for psychologists. It's as if, to me, when I read this, it's almost as if it was written for Bigfoot. Empirical methods, both observational and analytical, quantitative, of investigating mysteries. Bigfoot's a mystery. Bigfoot's in nature. Systematic attempts to measure and quantify aspects of behavior and the processes of the mind. We've done this with humans. intelligence, emotions. Those are abstract, undefinable, unable to directly measure, but yet psychology has been able to identify those, quantify those, measure those with utility. But we're not only concerned about our results, we're also concerned about bias. We're concerned about our experimental subjects and the impact that we have on them. We're concerned about keeping complete records. You don't just write down the responses you get when you make a tree knock. You write down the number of times you got a tree knock, you made a tree knock and got no response, so you can compare the two. Communications of one's findings and conclusions in the ways that allow objective observers to replicate and repeat findings or to reject the conclusions. Such research seeks to discover the structure of behavior and the psychological processes, as well as their causes and determinants. To find structure and interrelationships, correlational methods and analysis should be used. If you want to discover causality, then you've got to use experimentation. So just getting out there, doing a survey and gathering statistics, that's not experimentation. That's taking a survey. To determine causality, you've got to do experimental design. And that's good and bad news. The path is there for us. We're just not willing to make the changes at this point to make it happen. We want to prove that Bigfoot caused that footprint, that Bigfoot caused that whoop or that yell or that scream or that chirp or that oomph, or however we experience Bigfoot. We want to be able to prove that Bigfoot is causing those phenomena. And that's what psychology has done for human beings. Good fit. Functional analysis, internal organismic factors, contributions, environmental context. We got to consider it all. Defining variables operationally. One of the big mysteries, I think, for people who watch my show is how do you go from recording a tree knock and turning that into a number? Well, you operationally define what is a tree knock. It's a knock in response to us making a knock with a piece of wood against a tree that has a one tonal quality. And so you make your first tree knock, wait 10 minutes, nothing happens. Number is knock number 1, response 0. Now you make your second tree knock, number 2. Oh, on our second tree knock, we got a response. Was it 1, a tree knock response, 2, a stone clack, 3, a vocalization? And so each of those categories is associated with the number. And it's those numbers that you then use in your statistical analysis. It's how you create and transform the sound of a tree knock you heard into an analyzable data point for a statistical analysis. Boy, I could talk forever. We got to hold up to reliability and validity. Reliability. Let's start with validity. Validity. Are we measuring what we say we're measuring? Are we measuring Bigfoot when we take a footprint or when we take a recording? That's validity. Reliability is, are the tests we're using to capture that phenomena performing reliably over time? Are we reliably, repeatedly measuring valid Bigfoot phenomena, which is validity. Valid Bigfoot phenomena, reliability. Are we capturing it across time consistently and accurately? We won't go into coincidence correlations any more than we have already today. And we're going to stop there. Any questions, folks? Uh-oh. Jessica's dropping names and impressed Dr. Mitchell here. The truth emerges more readily from error than from confusion. Thomas Kuhn. Ooh, that's deep, guys. And that wasn't a sarcastic woo. That was a genuine. Emerges more readily from error than from confusion. Yeah, if you're not making error, if you don't have error, if you're not making mistakes, you're not learning. That's for sure. Well, listen, guys, it's been a pleasure as always hanging out with y'all. And I'm going to say goodbye for tonight. I'm going to ask you to keep your minds open, your boots on the ground, and your heart with your higher power. God bless you all. Have a good night.
I see you running out of reason. Don't try to blame it on the seasons. Why you wanna walk away? When we began, swear we had something that would last. Baby, has the feeling passed? Falling in was easy. How do I make it stay? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Oh, I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Was I a fool? I know sometimes I may wonder, but I would never leave asunder a thing as good as what we have. Is it a rule? What's good is worth the fighting. There ain't no denying that you and I were made to last. Falling in was easy. How can we make it stay? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. I'll never let go of you. Tried and Have you had a change of heart? Can we go back to the start? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. I'll never let go of you. Tried and true.
side. If you're in, meet me